There was a time before the flood when the sky still communicated with the earth in ways we don't understand today. The vastness of the firmament stretched over creation like a thin veil between two worlds, and within that veil were observers. They were not men. They were spirits appointed to watch, to contemplate, to record. Their names were known in the heavens. Their orders were clear, but there is something written in the ancient manuscripts that time has tried to erase. Something about a decision that should never have been made. Mount Hermon rose like a stone altar among the clouds covered in perpetual snow, far from human eyes. There, where the earth touched the sky, 200 angels gathered. It was not an accidental meeting. It was deliberate, planned, conspired. And what they did on that sacred peak broke the very order of creation. They made an oath, a pact sealed not before God, but among themselves. Semjaza, the leader, knew that what they were about to do would bring eternal consequences. And so he demanded that they all swear together, so that none of them could back down and leave the others to bear alone the weight of what was to come. But there is something deeper here. They did not descend out of curiosity. They descended out of desire. The daughters of men had multiplied upon the face of the earth, and their beauty was disturbing even to celestial beings. The Book of Enoch records with surgical precision. They saw, they desired, and they decided to take. It was not love. It was the conscious transgression of a boundary that should never be crossed. Angels were not created to unite with flesh. The divine order was clear, but at that moment, atop Mount Hermon, 200 observers chose to become transgressors, and the sky watched in silence. They descended, not as messengers of light, but as invaders of a domain that did not belong to them. They took women for themselves. They fathered children who should not exist. And these children were different. The text of Genesis chapter 6 speaks of giants, but the original word is Nephilim, the fallen ones. They were creatures of impossible stature, immense strength, and insatiable appetite. 300 cubits tall, according to the manuscripts. They consumed everything. They devoured animals, then men. The earth groaned under the weight of their existence. They were not part of the plan. They were a violent anomaly, a rupture in creation that stained everything around them. But what the Watchers brought was not merely genetic corruption. They brought knowledge. Azazel taught men to forge swords, shields, and instruments of war. He taught women to adorn themselves with precious metals, to paint their eyes, and to seduce with their appearance. He taught alchemy, astrology, the manipulation of the roots of the earth and the signs of the heavens. Semjaza taught enchantments, Amaros, the breaking of spells, Barakel, the stars, Kokabiel, omens, Tamiel, celestial signs, Asradel, the course of the moon. And humanity learned too quickly. Knowledge without wisdom is poison, and the poison spread. Violence exploded, witchcraft reigned, impurity became the norm. The earth was corrupted before God, not only morally, genetically, spiritually, structurally. What should have been human was being rewritten by hands that had no authority to rewrite it, and the cry of creation rose to the throne. But something was happening in the heavens that the earth did not yet know. 4 archangels heard the cry: Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, Uriel. They saw the blood spilled by the Nephilim. They saw the souls exterminated without judgment. They saw creation being undone from within, and they carried the cry before the Most High. It was not a suggestion. It was a plea for justice. How long will you allow this to continue? And the answer came, but not as they expected. It wouldn't be an immediate intervention. It would be a phased judgment. First, the Watchers would be imprisoned in darkness. Then, their children would destroy each other. And finally, the earth would be cleansed, purified, reborn. But before judgment came, one man needed to testify. His name was Enoch. And what he saw would change everything we thought we knew about the unseen. Enoch was not a prophet by choice. He was a scribe of heaven by divine appointment. He walked with God in a way that no other man walked, and for this reason he was taken to see what mortal eyes should not behold. He was led to where the imprisoned Watchers awaited the final judgment. And there, in that darkness that precedes the abyss, they asked for something impossible. They asked Enoch to intercede for them, to carry a petition for mercy to the Most High, to plead for forgiveness on their behalf. But there was something terribly wrong with this request. They knew exactly what they had done. They knew the law. They understood the order, and yet they chose to break it. It wasn't ignorance. It was conscious rebellion. And Enoch, upon presenting the petition, received a direct answer from the divine presence. There will be no peace for you. There will be no forgiveness. You should intercede for men before me. But now men intercede for you, and yet there is no mercy. And those who understand the weight of this statement do not remain silent. They mark this moment. They declare that they have heard. They leave a record in the comments below that something eternal is being revealed here, because what is being shown now is not theological fiction. It is spiritual history recorded in texts that have spanned millennia, and those who remain until the end of this revelation understand that there are layers yet to be unveiled. Because the question the Watchers didn't ask was the most important one. Why was mercy denied to them, but offered to the men they corrupted? The answer lies in the nature of their origin. Angels were not created to fall and rise again. They were created to serve eternally or rebel permanently. There is no redemption for those who know full glory and choose darkness. But men were made from dust, and dust can be reshaped. But that didn't end the matter. The sons of the Watchers, the Nephilim, still walked the earth, and the judgment upon them would be different. It wouldn't be imprisonment and darkness. It would be mutual destruction. Michael himself received the order. Incite them against one another. Cause them to destroy each other with their own hands. And that is exactly what happened. Giants warred against giants. Blood of immense stature soaked the earth. And when the last of them fell, their spirits did not rest. They became the evil spirits that roam the earth to this day. But the divine plan was not yet complete. The earth needed to be purified. And for this, Raphael received a specific mission. Bind Azazel hand and foot, cover him with darkness, cast him into the desert of Dudael, place rough, sharp stones upon him, and there he shall remain until the day of the great judgment, when he will be cast into the eternal fire. Azazel, who taught men the art of war and seduction, was the first to be sealed. Not destroyed, sealed, because the final judgment was still far off. And while this was happening in unseen places, the earth remained corrupted. The violence did not cease with the imprisonment of the Watchers. Men had already learned too much. They had already seen too much. and now they willingly practiced what had previously been taught to them by celestial beings. Evil had taken root in human culture, in social structures, in religious practices, in the spiritual DNA of antediluvian civilization. And that was when the final sentence was pronounced. No longer just against the Watchers, no longer just against the Nephilim, but against all of corrupted creation. The water that was above the firmament would be released. The water that was below the earth would burst forth, and everything that breathed would be wiped from the face of the ground. But there's something crucial that needs to be understood here. The flood was not an act of uncontrolled divine wrath. It was an act of preservation. If the genetic and spiritual corruption brought about by the Watchers continued, there would be no pure lineage from which the promised Redeemer could be born. All of humanity would be so mixed with the blood of the fallen that the promise made in Eden, the seed of the woman who would crush the serpent's head, would become impossible. Noah was not chosen by chance. The text says that he was perfect in his generations, not morally perfect, genetically pure. His lineage had not been contaminated, and that is why he and his family were preserved. 8 souls, only 8, from an entire civilization that had achieved technological advancements and supernatural knowledge that we still do not fully understand today. And while the ark was being built year after year, wood upon wood, the men mocked. They laughed. They continued marrying and being given in marriage, eating and drinking, living as if the warning had not been given, as if judgment were not coming, as if time had no end. But there was a day set, and when that day arrived, there was no more time for regret. The rain began like something no one had ever seen before. It wasn't a storm, it was atmospheric collapse. The firmament that separated the waters above from the waters below ruptured, and what fell wasn't drops. It was liquid curtains descending from the sky with enough force to crush. At the same time, the fountains of the great abyss opened. The earth trembled, it cracked, and water gushed from within the depths with pressure that could split mountains. It wasn't a flood, it was hydraulic annihilation. And everything the Watchers had built, all the fortified cities, all the temples of forbidden knowledge, all the astrological observation towers, collapsed under the weight of the water that rose meter by meter, day after day. The Nephilim, with all their immense strength, tried to resist. Some climbed the highest mountains, others tried to build makeshift rafts. But the water wouldn't stop, 15 cubits above the highest peaks. And there, at that height where the air no longer sustained life, even the giants drowned. Their bodies floated for weeks, swollen, unrecognizable. And when they finally sank, the earth swallowed them. But their spirits, those found no rest, because they were not entirely human. They had no place prepared for them in Sheol, and so they wandered between worlds, without bodies, without destiny, seeking to inhabit any flesh that would open a door for them. Meanwhile, inside the ark, Noah and his family listened to the sound of extinction. Cries swallowed by the water, bangs on the grouted wood from those trying to enter when it was too late, and then silence. Only the sound of the relentless rain and the rocking of the ark on waters that covered the entire world. There was no horizon. There was no land. Only grey sky and endless sea. And there, floating above what was once civilization, Noah's family waited. They didn't know when the water would recede. They didn't know if there would be land again. They only knew that the voice that had commanded them to build the ark was the same one that had promised to preserve them. But there is something the manuscripts record about this period that is rarely mentioned. During the 150 days that the waters prevailed over the earth, something was happening in the celestial realms. The imprisoned watchers heard the sound of the destruction of everything they had corrupted. Their children were being erased. Their human wives were drowning. And all the forbidden knowledge they had shared was being swallowed by the depths. They could not interfere. They could not reverse it. They could only witness the final consequence of an oath made on a mountaintop in a time that seemed too distant to matter. And here's the detail that changes everything. They knew this would happen. Enoch had already prophesied it. The archangels had already declared it. The sentence had already been pronounced. And yet they took the oath. Because what drives angelic rebellion is not ignorance. It's pride. It's the belief that somehow they could alter the course of eternal decrees. That they could create an alternate reality where their will prevailed over the Creator's will. And the flood was the definitive answer. There is no alternate reality. There is no scheme that surpasses the divine plan. There is no pact that annuls the eternal pact. When the rain finally stopped, it took more than a year for the waters to recede completely. The ark rested on the mountains of Ararat, and Noah opened the window he had made and released a raven, then a dove, and the third time the dove returned with an olive leaf in its beak. It was the sign. The earth was drying. Life was beginning again. But when Noah finally set foot on dry land again, the world he found was radically different from the world he had left. There were no cities. There were no giants. There were no monuments to the watchers. Only mud, rocks, broken trees, and silence. Noah's first act was to build an altar, not to celebrate his own survival, but to acknowledge that God's mercy had prevailed even amidst the most severe judgment ever executed on earth. He took clean animals and offered burnt offerings, and the aroma rose to the heavens as a memorial that despite corruption reaching catastrophic levels, there were still those who chose to worship instead of rebel. And the divine response was a covenant, a promise that the earth would never again be destroyed by water. The sign of this covenant was the rainbow, an optical phenomenon only possible when light passes through water. It was the very instrument of judgment transformed into a symbol of enduring mercy. But here's what many don't realize. The covenant wasn't just with Noah. It was with every living creature. With the animals, with the birds, with everything that moves on the earth. Because what the Watchers didn't just corrupt humanity. It corrupted all of creation. The manuscripts speak of hybrid animals, of creatures that shouldn't exist, of genetic mixtures that violated the boundaries established from the beginning. And the flood erased all of that. It reset the biosphere. It restored the species according to their original genera. And the covenant with Noah ensured that this order would never again be broken in the same way. However, the story of the Watchers did not end there. Its consequences continued to echo through the centuries. Because although the original 200 were imprisoned, and although their direct descendants had been destroyed, something remained. The spirits of the Nephilim, now bodiless, continued to exert influence. The occult practices that Azazel taught were not completely forgotten. fragments of forbidden knowledge survived through oral traditions passed down from generation to generation. And at certain points in post-Diluvian history, we see strange resurgences. Giants appear again, not on the same scale as the original Nephilim, but in size and ferocity that defied natural explanation. Goliath of Gath, the sons of Anak, Og, king of Bashan, whose iron bed was 9 cubits long, King Arba and his descendants. They all appear in biblical narratives as genetic anomalies that needed to be exterminated by divine order. And the reason was always the same. They carried traces of the corruption that the Watchers had introduced. They were not fully human, and their existence represented a threat to the lineage through which the promised Redeemer would come. Therefore, Israel received specific orders. Leave no survivors. Make no alliances. Show no compassion. Not because God was cruel, but because the war was not merely physical. It was spiritual. It was genetic. It was a battle for the preservation of the pure seed. And this brings us to a disturbing question that needs to be asked. Why did the Watchers do what they did exactly when they did it? The timing wasn't accidental. They descended during the generation of Jared, whose name means descent. It was during his lifetime that the event occurred, and this was only a few generations after Seth, who had been established as Abel's replacement to preserve the godly lineage. That is, as soon as there was a clear distinction between the descendants of Seth and the descendants of Cain, the Watchers intervened. They corrupted both lineages. They mixed everything up. They created a situation where there were no more pure ones, except for Noah's family. This suggests something profound. The Watchers' intervention was strategic. It was a direct attack on the promise of Eden, an attempt to prevent the birth of what had been prophesied. If all of humanity were corrupted, where would the woman's seed come from? How could someone truly human be born to redeem humanity? And if the Watchers succeeded, the serpent would have won. The promise would have failed, and creation would be lost forever. But there was one detail they hadn't considered. God doesn't rely on plan Bs. He had already seen Noah. He had already preserved his lineage. And when all seemed lost, when corruption seemed total, a single righteous man was enough to start over. Because redemption never depended on numbers. It always depended on faithfulness. And Noah remained faithful when the whole world bowed to the knowledge of the fallen. Leave the word revelation in the comments if you are understanding what really happened before the flood. What happened to the Watchers after the flood is one of the deepest mysteries of spiritual theology. They were not destroyed. They were imprisoned. And there is a crucial distinction here that the ancient texts make very clear. The imprisonment was not in Sheol, where the dead rest. It was not in Hades, where they await judgment. It was in a place called Tartarus, explicitly mentioned in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, where it is written that God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them into Tartarus, delivering them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment. This is not a place of active torment. It is a place of conscious restraint. They are imprisoned but fully aware, awaiting, knowing exactly what awaits them. And what awaits them is not simple extinction. It is the lake of fire, the final judgment, the second death. But until that day arrives, they remain confined in darkness, unable to directly interfere in the physical world, yet still able to witness everything that happens. And this, in a way, is part of the torment. They see history unfold, They see the lineage they tried to corrupt produce exactly what was promised. They see the Messiah born. They see him live without sin. They see him die and rise again. And they know they have failed completely, irreversibly. But there is something that happened between the imprisonment of the Watchers and the flood that is rarely discussed. Enoch records that before they were sealed away, the Watchers saw their children killing each other. Michael had incited the Nephilim to civil war. And while giants slaughtered giants, the heavenly parents watched helplessly. They could not intervene. They could not protect. They could only witness the destruction of all that they had begotten through their transgression. And when the last Nephilim fell, and the earth was silent before the rain began, the Watchers were dragged into the darkness. Not by demons, but by archangels. Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, Uriel. Those who remained faithful carried out the sentence upon those who rebelled, and this reveals something about the nature of divine justice. It is not impersonal. It is not automatic. It is executed by beings who fully understand the gravity of what is happening. The archangels who imprisoned the Watchers knew them. They had served alongside them. They had worshipped together before the throne. And now they were carrying out the order to imprison them eternally. There was no pleasure in this. Only solemn obedience to a just sentence against an inexplicable rebellion. But the effects of the Watchers' rebellion did not end with their imprisonment. The spirits of the Nephilim, called evil spirits in the manuscripts, continued to wander. And here's something most people don't connect. These are demons. They are not fallen angels. They are hybrids between angels and humans who have died physically, but whose spirits have no designated place in the afterlife. They are not fully angelic to be judged as angels. They are not fully human to go to Sheol as humans. They are spiritual anomalies desperately seeking to inhabit physical bodies again. And that is why, when we find demons in the Gospels, they are always possessing people or animals. They need a body. Without a body, they wander in barren places, restless, without purpose. And this explains the nature of demonic possession. It's not simply influence, it's forced inhabitation. It's a disembodied spirit trying to relive the experience of having flesh. And when Jesus casts out demons, what he is doing is not just freeing a person. He is forcing these spirits back into the bodiless void where they suffer in conscious solitude. That's why demons beg not to be sent to the abyss, because the abyss is where they are completely isolated, with no possibility of interaction with the physical world. It's a different kind of prison from Tartarus, where the Watchers are, but equally terrible. However, there is a hierarchy here that needs to be understood. The spirits of the Nephilim, the demons, do not operate independently. They have rulers. And these rulers are the fallen angels themselves who were not imprisoned in Tartarus. Because not all the angels who rebelled were sealed immediately. Satan, the anointed cherub who rebelled before the creation of humanity, still operates with a certain degree of freedom, and he commands hierarchies of principalities, powers, and rulers of this dark world. Some of these beings are the Watchers themselves who did not descend with the 200. Others are angels who allied themselves with Satan's rebellion at different times in spiritual history. And here's the detail that connects everything. The Watchers' rebellion wasn't the first angelic rebellion. It was an extension of Satan's original rebellion, a coordinated attempt to corrupt creation from within. Satan had tried to seduce Eve with forbidden knowledge. He had failed to destroy the promise through Cain killing Abel. And then the Watchers descended with a more elaborate plan to genetically corrupt all of humanity. If that worked, there would be no pure bloodline. There would be no birth of the Redeemer, and the serpent would have won. But Noah was preserved, and with him the lineage. And through that lineage, centuries later, Abraham was born, and from Abraham, Isaac, and from Isaac, Jacob, and from Jacob, Judah, and from Judah, David, and from David, the house from which the Messiah would come. Each generation was protected. Each spiritual attack was repelled. Each attempt at extinction failed, not because the lineage was strong, but because what had been promised in Eden could not be undone by any celestial or earthly conspiracy. And when Jesus was finally born in Bethlehem, the powers of darkness immediately recognized it. Herod tried to kill him. Satan tried to tempt him in the desert. Demons cried out his name in fear, because they knew what his coming meant, the end of any hope of victory for the rebellion. Final defeat was assured, and everything the Watchers had tried to do, all the forbidden knowledge they had shared, all the Nephilim they had begotten, all the corruption they had spread, all of it had failed to prevent the birth of what had been prophesied from the beginning. And this brings us to a profound truth that runs throughout the Watcher's narrative. Evil never creates. It only corrupts. Satan cannot generate life. He can only twist what already exists. The Watchers didn't create the Nephilim out of nothing. They had to violate the natural order and unite with humans. And even then, the result was monstrous, unstable, self-destructive. Because when you force something that shouldn't exist, it inevitably disintegrates. The Nephilim fought amongst themselves to the very end. The demons wander aimlessly. The Watchers wait in eternal darkness. Everything built through rebellion crumbled, and everything preserved through faithfulness remained. And that is why the history of the Watchers is not just ancient history. It is a present warning. It is a revelation about how rebellion against divine order always ends in destruction. No matter how powerful the rebel, no matter how elaborate the plan, no matter how many join the pact, the end is always the same. Darkness, judgment, eternal fire. Comment on faithfulness if you understand why Noah was preserved while the entire world was destroyed. But there's an even deeper layer to this story that few explore. The names of the Watchers weren't recorded by chance. Each name carries meaning. Each leader had a specialty. And when you analyze what each one taught, you realize it wasn't a random transfer of knowledge. It was a curriculum calculated to destroy. Semjaza, whose name means rebellious name, led the pact and taught incantations. Not entertainment magic, genuine sorcery that invoked spiritual entities and manipulated forces that should remain invisible. He taught men to cut roots, not for herbal medicine, but for rituals that opened portals between dimensions. Azazel, meaning sending goat or force of God, was the most devastating. He taught not only war, but also beauty as a weapon. He showed women how to use cosmetics, adornments, precious stones, and precious metals to seduce and manipulate. He taught men to forge swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, and more. He taught primitive alchemy, the transmutation of metals, and the secrets of dyes that changed colors and appearances. Each of these practices had a purpose: to make the exterior appear different from the interior, to create illusion, to deceive. And when you think about it, you realize that Azazel was attacking the very essence of divine truth. God sees the heart. But Azazel taught humanity to hide the heart behind increasingly elaborate masks. Amaros taught the resolution of enchantments, how to break spells. This may seem beneficial until you realize the implication. To teach how to break them, he first had to teach how to create them. Barakel taught astrology, not astronomy, the scientific observation of the heavens, but astrology, the belief that celestial movements control human destinies. This corrupted free will. It made men believe they were bound to immutable cosmic patterns, removing personal responsibility and obscuring divine sovereignty. Kokabil taught omens, how to read signs in clouds, thunder, the flight of birds. Tamil revealed the complete celestial signs, constellations, eclipses, planetary alignments. Asradal taught the course of the moon and its cycles, and there's something crucial here. All the knowledge was legitimate. The problem wasn't the information itself. It was the timing and the purpose. This knowledge should have been gradually discovered by humanity through observation, error, and learning. But the Watchers accelerated everything. They gave advanced knowledge to immature minds. And more, they taught this knowledge outside the context of reverence for the Creator. Astrology without acknowledging that God created the stars. War without understanding justice. Beauty without understanding that true glory comes from within. It was knowledge divorced from wisdom. And that is always destructive. But there was another body of knowledge mentioned in the manuscripts that is even more disturbing. Some Watchers taught pharmacopoeia, the use of roots, herbs, and compounds to create drugs. Not healing medicines. Drugs that altered consciousness, induced visions, and created addiction. They taught poisons extracted from plants and animals. They taught how to mix substances to create specific effects on the body and mind. And when you think about how this would be used in a civilization without moral restraints, without medical ethics, without reverence for life, you understand why God said the earth was full of violence. They weren't just killing each other with swords. They were poisoning, drugging, manipulating bodily chemistry to dominate minds. And there's another detail the texts preserve. Some Watchers taught about clouds and signs of the earth. This seems vague until you realize you're talking about primitive meteorology and geology. They taught how to predict storms, identify impending earthquakes, and recognize weather patterns. Again, legitimate knowledge. But used without God, it became a tool of superstition and manipulation. Antediluvian shamans who knew how to read the skies began to claim divine powers. Weather controllers, prophets of natural disasters. And people worshipped them as minor gods because they knew what was coming. But something even more sinister was happening alongside all of this. While the men were learning forbidden knowledge, the women who had joined the Watchers were giving birth. And the gestation process of a Nephilim was not like a normal pregnancy. The manuscripts suggest that these pregnancies were prolonged, painful, and supernatural. The women carrying these children felt something growing inside them that was too big, too strong, too different. And when the Nephilim were born, many mothers died in childbirth. Because the human body was not designed to give birth to creatures 3 meters tall, 4 meters, some reaching 10 meters when adults, and these Nephilim grew rapidly. It didn't take them years to mature like normal humans. In months, they were already the size of adults, and their appetite was insatiable. They ate more in a day than a human family in a week. And when food began to run out, because there were so many of them consuming so much, they turned to other sources. First, they hunted all the wild animals to near extinction. Then, they killed domesticated animals, and when those ran out, they began to devour humans themselves. It wasn't ordinary hunger, it was something deeper, as if they constantly needed to consume because there was a void within them that could never be satisfied. Because they shouldn't exist, and their existence was a biological and spiritual contradiction that created perpetual need without the possibility of satiation. And here's something that connects everything back to the Watchers' original purpose. They were appointed to watch, to observe, to report. Their function was to witness the development of humanity and keep a record for the heavens. But they reversed everything. Instead of passively observing, they actively intervened. Instead of reporting to the heavens, they taught celestial secrets to earth. Instead of preserving the separation between dimensions, they created hybrids that broke the barrier. And instead of glorifying the Creator through their service, they glorified themselves by becoming objects of human worship. Because that's what happened. The Watchers didn't just come down to take women. They came down to be revered, to receive worship that belonged only to God. And humans, dazzled by these powerful beings descending from the sky, began to build altars for them, to offer sacrifices, to invoke their names in rituals. And when their Nephilim children were born, they too were treated as demigods. The mythology of all ancient cultures is full of these stories. Giants, renowned heroes, children of gods and mortals, demigods. These are not invented legends. They are distorted memories of real events, of when fallen angels walked the earth and spawned monsters. And the reason God had to erase all of that wasn't a whim. It was absolute necessity. If that civilization continued, it would achieve such advanced knowledge, combined with such total corruption, that the very structure of reality would begin to collapse. Because when you mix the celestial with the terrestrial in an unauthorized way, when you force matter to do what it wasn't designed to do, when you invoke spiritual forces without authority to control them, the result is escalating chaos that eventually destroys everything. The flood wasn't God giving up on creation. It was God saving what could still be saved before it was too late, even for him to intervene within the parameters he himself established for created freedom. Leave the word oath in the comments if you understood that the Watchers' pact on Mount Hermon was the beginning of everything. After the floodwaters receded and the earth dried, something extraordinary needed to happen. Creation had to begin again. And Noah, upon leaving the ark, received a commandment that echoed the original commandment given to Adam. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. But there was a crucial difference this time. God added something that wasn't in the original commandment. He said, "The fear of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth and on all the birds of the air. Everything that moves on the earth and all the fish of the sea are given into your hands." Before the flood, there wasn't this dynamic of fear between humans and animals. They coexisted in balance. But now, something had structurally changed in the relationship between humanity and the rest of creation. And this leads us to ask, what caused this change? The answer lies partly in what the Watchers did. They didn't just corrupt humans. The manuscripts indicate that they also interfered with animals. They created hybrids. They mixed species. And this resulted in creatures that threatened both humans and normal animals. The flood erased these abominations. But the genetic memory remained. The animals that came out of the ark carried the instinct that there was something dangerous in humanity, something that needed to be feared. And God institutionalized this fear as protection for both sides, so that there would never again be the familiarity that allowed rampant genetic manipulation. But even with this new beginning, the shadow of the Watchers continued to exert influence through the centuries. Because although the original 200 were imprisoned, and although the Nephilim had been destroyed, the memory of what they did was not completely erased. Ham, one of Noah's sons, witnessed something in his father that led him down a path of rebellion. And through Ham came Cush, and from Cush came Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. But this description in Genesis chapter 10 is not praise. It is a warning. Nimrod was the first mighty man on earth after the flood. And what he built was the first post-flood attempt to recreate what the Watchers had established. A civilization centered on rebellion against God. Babel, the tower. It wasn't just an ambitious construction. It was a theological statement. Let us build ourselves a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. They didn't want to reach God to worship him. They wanted to reach the heavens to be like the Watchers, to have access to what was celestial through their own merit. And the phrase, "let us make a name for ourselves," reveals the motive: self-glorification. The same motivation that led the Watchers to descend. The same pride that moved Lucifer to rebel. And God saw that if he did not intervene, the newly restarted humanity would repeat the complete cycle that led to the flood. So he confused the languages. He scattered the nations. He broke the unity that was being used for evil. And this is where something fascinating happens in the later narratives. When we read about the nations that Israel encounters upon entering Canaan, we find giants again. But where did they come from if the Nephilim were destroyed in the flood? There are two possibilities that biblical scholars discuss. First, that there was a second incursion of fallen angels after the flood, smaller in scale, but sufficient to generate a new lineage of giants. Second, that some recessive genes survived through the wives of Noah's sons and eventually manifested in later generations. Both theories have problems, but what is undeniable is that giants appear again, and always in the lands that Israel was to conquer, as if there were a deliberate strategy to occupy the promised land with descendants of the fallen before the lineage of Abraham could take root. The spies Moses sent to Canaan returned terrified. "We saw giants, the sons of Anak, descendants of the Nephilim. We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes." This description was no exaggeration. Archaeological excavations in regions where these peoples lived have revealed doorways, beds, and tools that suggest beings of stature far above the human average. And the order God gave to Israel was clear and brutal: total extermination. No captives, no alliances, no survivors allowed. And when Israel disobeyed and spared some, it always resulted in problems generations later. Because it wasn't just territorial warfare. It was genetic and spiritual cleansing. But something even deeper was happening. These giant nations weren't just physically large. They practiced rituals directly connected to the knowledge the Watchers had taught. Child sacrifices to Moloch, sacred prostitution in the temples of Astarte, necromancy and consulting the dead, reading omens and human sacrifices to manipulate spiritual forces. All of these were practices originally taught by the Watchers that survived in the form of pagan religious traditions. And when Israel was commanded to destroy these nations completely, it wasn't genocide out of cruelty. It was spiritual surgery, removing cancer before it spread and contaminated the entire region again. And here's the detail most people miss. Israel failed. It didn't complete the task. It left survivors. It made alliances. It intermarried with pagan nations. And the result was exactly what God had warned. Idolatry took hold. Altars to the Watchers, now called Baal, Molech, Dagon, Chemosh, were erected even in Jerusalem. And the kings of Israel began sacrificing their own children in the fire, repeating practices that went directly back to the days before the flood. The cycle was repeating itself, and each time this happened, God sent prophets to warn. And when the warnings were ignored, judgment came. But there is something that connects all of this back to the promise of Eden. Through all this mess, through the Watchers, the Nephilim, the flood, Babel, the giants of Canaan, the idolatry of Israel, one lineage remained protected. From Noah to Abraham, from Abraham to Judah, from Judah to David, and from David, the house that would produce the Messiah. And when you read the genealogies in Matthew and Luke, you realize that each name on that list represents a victory over attempts at extinction. Each generation survived spiritual and physical attacks. Each son was born against all odds, because the powers of darkness knew what was coming, and they tried to prevent it in every way possible. And when Jesus was finally born, the attack was immediate. Herod massacred all the male children in Bethlehem under the age of 2. It wasn't political paranoia. It was a coordinated demonic attack using a human king as a tool. But Joseph had already fled to Egypt with the child, and when they returned, Jesus grew up in Nazareth. And at 30 years old, he began his ministry. And one of the first things he did was confront demons. And they recognized him. They cried out his name. They begged not to be tormented, because they knew exactly who he was, the seed of the woman promised in Eden, the one who would crush the serpent's head, the end of all hope of victory for all the celestial rebels and their spiritual descendants. Comment lineage if you realized that the entire history of the Watchers was an attempt to prevent the birth of the Messiah. There is a specific moment in the Gospels that most people read quickly, but which carries profound meaning when connected to the story of the Watchers. Jesus is in the region of Caesarea Philippi, literally at the foot of Mount Hermon, where the 200 angels took the oath. In that exact spot, there was a deep cave called the Gate of Hades, where pagan rituals were performed and sacrifices offered to Pan, the goat god. It was considered literally an entrance to the underworld, and it is there, in that place saturated with the spiritual memory of the Watchers' rebellion, that Jesus asks, "Who do men say that the Son of Man is?" And Peter answers, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus declares, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." It was no accidental location. It was a strategic declaration. In the very place where fallen angels initiated the corruption that nearly destroyed humanity, Jesus declared that his church would be built, and that not even the gates of Hades, the very realm of the dead, the domain where the watchers await judgment, would be able to prevail against what he was establishing. It was a direct confrontation. It was Jesus stepping onto enemy territory and claiming final victory over everything the watchers had tried to do. And this brings us to something that is rarely connected: the crucifixion. When Jesus died on the cross, something happened in the spiritual world that goes far beyond the forgiveness of sins. Colossians chapter 2 says that having disarmed the rulers and authorities, Jesus made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. What does disarmed mean? It means that he removed the legal authority they claimed over humanity. Because Adam's sin had given Satan and his fallen angels a certain degree of dominion over creation, and the Watchers, by genetically corrupting the human race, tried to make that authority permanent. If there were no pure humans, there would be no possible redemption, and demonic dominion would be eternal. But Jesus was born pure. He lived without sin, and he died as a substitutionary sacrifice. And in doing so, he not only paid for the sins of humanity, he broke the legal claim that the powers of darkness had over creation. Revelation chapter 12 records that there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels, and they were cast out, and a voice declared, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ, for the accuser of our brothers has been cast out." The accuser, Satan, the same one who orchestrated the Watchers' rebellion. He was cast out, not destroyed yet, but stripped of his heavenly position confined to earth. And that is why the Bible says that Satan knows his time is short. Since the cross, he has been legally defeated. Only the final execution of the sentence remains, and that will happen when Christ returns. Revelation chapter 20 describes that an angel will descend from heaven with the key to the abyss and a great chain. And he will seize the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bind him for 1,000 years. And after the 1,000 years, he will be released for a short time. And then the final judgment will come, the lake of fire. And the devil, the beast, and the false prophet will be thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And there also will be thrown the Watchers, who have been imprisoned in Tartarus since before the flood. But there is something that happens before that which closes the cycle completely. 2 Peter chapter 3 prophesies that the day of the Lord will come, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up, just as there was a flood of water that purified the earth from the corruption of the Watchers. There will be a flood of fire that will purify the entire creation from the presence of any vestige of evil. It will not be final destruction. It will be total purification. Because Peter goes on to say that, according to God's promise, we await new heavens and a new earth, in which righteousness dwells. And there is the final answer to all that the Watchers tried to do. They wanted to corrupt creation permanently. But creation will be completely renewed. They wanted to prevent the birth of the Redeemer. But the Redeemer was born, died, rose again, and is returning. They wanted to establish an eternal kingdom through their giant descendants. But these were all destroyed, and the only eternal kingdom will be the kingdom of Christ. They wanted to share forbidden knowledge to make humanity independent of God. But true knowledge, the knowledge of God through Christ, is now available to all humanity who choose to receive it. And there's something final that needs to be said here. The Watchers weren't forced to rebel. They chose to. They took a conscious oath knowing the consequences, and therefore there is no redemption for them. But for humanity, which was deceived, corrupted, and manipulated by these beings, there is complete redemption. Not because we deserve it, but because the Son of God chose to become human, not an angel, specifically to redeem the human race. Hebrews chapter 2 makes this explicit. For it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. Jesus didn't die for fallen angels. He died for fallen humans. And he offers salvation to anyone who repents and believes. And this means that you, who have remained until now listening to this revelation, have a choice that the Watchers no longer have. You can choose which side of the spiritual war you will be on. You can choose to acknowledge that there is a Redeemer who has overcome everything that darkness has tried to do. You can choose to align your life with the eternal purpose that has survived all attacks from Eden until now. Or you can choose to ignore it, continue living as if this spiritual reality did not exist, and eventually discover too late that choices have consequences that extend beyond this life. Comment "choose" if you understand that the same decision the Watchers made on Mount Hermon is the same decision you make every day, to align yourself with God or to rebel against Him. And now we come to what is written about the last days. Because the history of the Watchers is not just the past, it is a pattern that repeats itself. And there are specific prophecies about the end times that disturbingly echo antediluvian events. Jesus himself said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all." If, at first glance, it seems that he is only talking about spiritual carelessness. But when you read more deeply, you realize that there are specific parallels with what happened before the flood. Daniel chapter 2 records Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the statue with a head of gold, chest of silver, belly of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of iron mixed with clay. And Daniel's interpretation is clear all the way to the feet. He says, "As for what you saw of iron mixed with clay, they will mingle through marriage, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. They will mingle through marriage, but they will not adhere, exactly as happened when the Watchers united with the daughters of men. Unions that generated unstable hybrids. And there are scholars who interpret this as an indication that in the last days there will again be an attempt to mix the celestial with the earthly, to create hybrids, to genetically manipulate humanity. And when you look at the current development of technology, it becomes even more unsettling. Genetic editing, CRISPR, DNA manipulation, artificial intelligence developing consciousness, transhumanism, the movement that seeks to improve humanity through merging with machines. All of this echoes what the Watchers did, giving advanced knowledge before spiritual maturity to use that knowledge correctly. And just as antediluvian civilization achieved advancements that we don't fully comprehend today, modern civilization is achieving capabilities that surpass our wisdom to manage them ethically. Revelation chapter 9 describes something extraordinary. John sees a star falling from heaven to earth. and it was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. And when the shaft is opened, smoke rises like that of a great furnace, and from the smoke come locusts upon the earth. But they are not normal locusts. They are hybrid creatures described in specific detail. They had tails and stingers like those of scorpions. The appearance of the locusts was like that of horses prepared for battle. They had hair like women's hair. Their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron. Hybrids, impossible mixtures, like the Nephilim, like the creatures that the Watchers helped to create through genetic manipulation. And these creatures have a king over them, the Angel of the Abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, in Greek Apollyon. Both mean destroyer, and there are theological theories that this is Azazel, the Watcher who was specifically bound in the desert of Dudael, awaiting the day of the great judgment, that he will be temporarily released at the end of times to command one last assault against humanity, a final attempt to corrupt, destroy, and prevent the establishment of Christ's eternal kingdom, and that this attempt will fail as completely as it failed the first time. But there is something even deeper in the prophecies. Revelation speaks of two beasts, one that rises from the sea, and another that rises from the earth. And the second beast performed signs and wonders, even making fire come down from heaven in the sight of men. And it deceives those who dwell on the earth, because of the signs it was given power to perform. And it commands them to make an image of the first beast, and it was given power to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image could speak, to give breath, to animate the inanimate, to create life where there should be none. Like the Watchers tried to create hybrids that should not exist. And here is the final detail that connects everything: the mark of the beast. Revelation 13 says that the second beast causes everyone to receive a mark on their right hand or forehead, and that no one can buy or sell without the mark. Many interpret this as an economic system, but what if it's deeper? What if it's genetic alteration, modification that fundamentally changes what it means to be human? Because if the mark alters the DNA, then whoever receives it is no longer completely human in the original sense. And just as God preserved Noah because he was genetically intact, there will again be a division between those who remain human, as created, and those who choose modification that removes them from the redeemable category. This would explain why Revelation is so emphatic about the fate of those who receive the mark. If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury. They will be tormented with burning sulfur, and the smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. Why such harsh language? Because if the mark fundamentally alters humanity, then there is no longer any possibility of redemption, just as there was none for the Nephilim. They were not completely human. And when Christ died, he died specifically as a human to redeem humans. If someone is genetically modified to the point of no longer being human in the original sense, redemption no longer applies. And this makes the choice in the last days absolutely crucial. It will not simply be about believing or not believing. It will be about remaining human or accepting a change that seems beneficial but has irreversible eternal consequences. Just as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Eden seemed good and desirable, but eating from it brought death, the mark of the beast will seem convenient and necessary, but accepting it will bring eternal damnation. And while all this unfolds, the Watchers imprisoned in Tartarus observe, knowing that their final judgment is near, knowing that all attempts to corrupt creation have failed, knowing that the kingdom they tried to establish through their giant children will be completely erased and replaced by the eternal kingdom of the one they tried to prevent from being born. And knowing that every human who chooses redemption through Christ is a victory against everything they tried to do. Comment permanence. If you understand that the battle of the last days will be about remaining human, as God created versus accepting modification that appears to be evolution but is corruption, and now you are where few arrive. Not by chance, but by choice. The choice to remain when most give up. The choice to listen to the end when the truth becomes heavy. The choice to see connections that stretch from before the flood to the last days. And this choice says something about you. It says that you are not satisfied with superficial versions. That you want to understand what is really happening behind what is visible. That you recognize that there is spiritual warfare happening, and that this warfare has a history, a strategy, and a final destiny. What has been revealed here is not conspiracy theory. It is not sensationalism. It is biblical history connected through ancient manuscripts, canonical texts, and prophecies that are still being fulfilled. It is the complete narrative of how fallen angels have tried to destroy the plan of redemption from the beginning. How they failed in the flood. How they tried again through giants in Canaan. How they failed again when Christ was born, died and resurrected. And how they will try one last time in the final days. And how they will ultimately fail when Christ returns in glory and judges all rebels, angelic and human, with perfect justice. But there is something crucial you need to understand now. This revelation was not given merely for knowledge. It was given for choice. Because now you know there is a spiritual dimension to reality. You know there is war going on. You know there is a victorious side and a defeated side. And you know you need to choose where to stand. You can no longer feign neutrality. Because neutrality is an illusion. Either you align yourself with the Creator and His plan of redemption, or you align yourself, even unconsciously, with the rebels who are doomed. And so, I leave you not just with information, but with a summons. First, subscribe to this channel immediately. Because what has been revealed here is only one layer of truth that most never see. There are other stories sealed in the manuscripts, other connections between biblical events and spiritual reality. And each video is an open door for those who hunger for deep understanding. Click subscribe. Activate the bell. Because those who watch to the end are the ones who receive progressive revelation. Second, leave your like now. Not as an empty gesture, but as a testament to the fact that you were touched by what you heard. Because the algorithm doesn't understand spiritual revelation, but it does understand engagement. And the more people we reach, the more souls witness what has been written since the foundation of the world. Your like is an instrument for others to see what you saw. Third, comment below with the word vigilante. If you fully understand that the oath on Mount Hermon was the beginning of a chain of events that spans all of human history to the last days, then your comment is not just a digital interaction. It is a public declaration that you heard that you understood and that you will not remain silent about what has been revealed. Room share this video, because there are people in your life who need to hear this, who are living without understanding that there is a spiritual battle happening, who are making choices without understanding the eternal consequences. And this video can be an instrument that opens their eyes to a reality beyond the visible. And now, the journey continues, because the story of the Watchers is only a part of the complete narrative. There are revelations about Babel, about Sodom and Gomorrah, about what really happened on Mount Sinai, about Ezekiel's visions, about Daniel's prophecies, about the apocalypse. And each revelation connects, each piece fits. And those who remain seeing everything until the end are the ones who understand the complete plan. The next video is waiting for you, and it reveals something that will completely change your understanding of why Israel received the order for total extermination against entire nations, about what was hidden in Canaan, about the false gods who were in fact Watchers being worshipped, and about how this battle continues to this day in ways you will immediately recognize around you. Click now, because those chosen to see beyond the veil don't stop at the first revelation. They continue, they delve deeper, they connect, and they understand that knowledge without application is useless, but knowledge with decision transforms destiny. The war is real, the sides are defined, and you have just been equipped to see clearly. Only movies, where the eternal becomes visible.